Hello and welcome to a special episode. Today we have Alexander Linkowski. Alexander, let's start. I want to, before we go into the topics of antinatalism or anything else,
Yeah.
if you could tell me, who is Alexander to our audience?
Who is Alexander? The way I like to answer this question is I don't know. I think a lot of the time people uh, think they know who they are. I sort of reject the concept of identity. I think identity is a concept created to make us feel safe in a world that really isn't safe, and to give us an illusion that we belong somewhere and it's supposed to hold meaning to us. So I don't. I like to say I don't know who I am, but I can tell you what I do. That is something I hope I know. I make YouTube videos, ranging from topics such as philosophy to the topics of mental health. I started my YouTube journey talking about my experience with the transition, but later moved on to cover other topics. I'm also in the process of writing a book. Actually, I'm editing right now because I finished the last chapter. So, and I did or actually Tejas here, Cosmic Antinatalist, as done a reaction to my video on antinatalism. Then I reacted to his, commented on that, and now we are here together to talk about it.
All right, very good. So let's get into the subject. I remember that at the time you had made a video saying you are no more an antinatalist. So it looks like you were an antinatalist, then you changed your mind, and then I made a response to your arguments why you think you're not an antinatalist and so on. So if we can start from the start, like if you were an antinatalist, why were you an antinatalist, and then why did you change your mind?
Uh-huh. So I was an antinatalist only for maybe 2 years in total. It also happened around the time when I was deep in my depression, and I think there's a connection there, because if you view life in a very pessimistic way, I think there's more of an inclination to accept something like antinatalism. But then again, I think I always had a more pessimistic approach towards life. Like, I never thought of life as purely beautiful. I think my eyes were always sort of trained to see the darkness of this world. Uh, and At the time when I started to read about antinatalism, and I was introduced to the concept of antinatalism through David Benatar. I was reading Benatar at the time. It appeals to me because, and I still inherently agree with the idea that by bringing someone into this world, by creating life, we can't really know what their fate will be, whether the life will be good, whether the life will be bad. Well, they will experience horrible physical or emotional pain. There are starvation, there's war, there's torture. uh, and Yeah, I mean, I kind of still agree with the premise. What moved me away from antinatalism is that, I when I think of ideologies, like to think of them as something that either has a certain goal, is feasible to achieve. And I started to think of antinatalism as a good idea on paper that I'm not sure if it can be turned into particular results, because I don't think you can make people not reproduce. At best, you can make or convince, maybe it's the right word, you can convince some people not to reproduce, and that will either create no change at all, or it will create actually worse effects for the society when there are fewer people and we don't have enough younger people to take care of the older ones.
Right. Yeah. So there's a social impact, and then there is a futility or feasibility side to it, is
Yes,
what your point
yes,
is, right?
yes.
Yeah. So, in terms of futility, I want to ask, like, in Better Never to Have Been, David Benatar, I think very early on, he's clear that he's under no illusion that people are going to stop procreating by reading his book
Yeah,
or by
yeah,
these
yeah.
philosophical arguments, right? That's one. He's already clarified that, and I think almost all antinatalists, or at least almost all serious antinatalists, know about this. The second part is you talked about goal of antinatalism. In your view, like what you thought that antinatalism, what was the goal of antinatalism, which then moved you away from antinatalism? What was that goal?
Well, well, I think it depends whether you think of ideology as something as a moral in and of itself, or as mm, as a schematics for to achieve something. And well, I think the goal of antinatalism would be to end suffering. Ultimately, it's I don't think it's necessarily about ending life. It's just that, well, if you end all life, you end all suffering. So it seems that anti-natalism in and of itself is not the core value of anti-natalism, as if the birth in and of itself has the negative value, but rather what it implies. I don't
Right.
know. I
So
don't know if you agree with that view, but
no, I, instead of agreeing or disagreeing, I want to explore
yeah,
what you're saying. So,
of course.
one somebody would say that you know this goal actually is probably of negative utilitarianism rather than antinatalism, because that's what negative utilitarianism is. But is there a difference, or you think these two then things the same?
Well, no, not necessarily, because if your main goal is to end suffering, antinatalism can be one of the potential ways through that. But I guess you can also value antinatalism in and some as something in and of itself, as it is a good value to not bring life, or for there to not be bring life. I think it can, in some cases, I'm pretty sure there are people who will view it as something independent of suffering. It doesn't matter whether there is suffering or not. Life in and of itself has a negative value, let's say.
So some people, I know a few people actually have different views on this goal of antinatalism. On some views, antinatalism doesn't have any goals. It's um, it's a position that we should not create a new sentient being or a new human, depending on your flavor
Mm,
of antinatalism, and that's it. I mean, whether other people are having children, that's still wrong or bad depending on your view, but
mm,
there is no goal as to bring extinction of all humans or extinction of all sentient beings. That is one view. I'm not saying that that is all view of all antinatalists.
mm,
It is important to note that David Benatar dedicates an entire chapter for extinction, to say that why extinction is preferable to non-extinction. So that part is there, but still there are antinatalists who say that no, actually there is no goal to antinatalism. It's only a moral position that it is wrong to bring about children. What would you say to that?
Well, I think uh, I do think that some things have value in and of itself, but I also think a lot of the time when we think of something as either morally correct or morally wrong, we also wish to create a society that reflects us that. So, if, let's say, you believe that it is morally correct to create an equal society or an egalitarian society, then it might also follow that a person who believes that will try to work to create an egalitarian society. Similarly, if you think that, let's say, abortion is immoral, then it also follows that a lot of people who believe that abortion is immoral would also either try to make abortion illegal, or will try to convince people not to have abortions. Um, but Yeah, sure. I think we all also have those beliefs that we just believe to be unethical or ethical, but we don't necessarily make like a specific pathway or goal out of it. I know I have some of those beliefs myself, whether I when I think something is right or wrong, but um, I don't necessarily dedicate a huge portion of my life to create a, or at least attempt to create a whole society around that idea. And a lot of the time I also know it wouldn't be feasible and it wouldn't make sense. Like, personally, I think that all kinds of sexual acts are immoral, no matter what kind. And I know I can't really force people to accept that position, and I also know it would be impossible for me to do that. So I think, sometimes you have to like choose your battles.
So, just out of curiosity, I know I'm
Yeah,
digressing a little bit,
sure.
but all kinds of sexual acts are immoral. Was that just a hypothetical example, or is that something you actually believe in?
It is something I actually believe in. I don't know if you want to hear more about it. It would be like a bit going off topic, but
Okay, if briefly, if you can give some reason why you think
sure.
it's immoral.
So I might try to explain it from a logical, analytical point of view, but I think there's always this element of feelings and experiences behind most of the things we're trying to rationalize about our views. And from a logical point of view, I would say I think it would be immoral to treat both yourself and other people as mere animals without that uh, human element that is unique to humans, and that's just to me personally, that's immoral. And I think also it's using another person's body to bring yourself pleasure. I'm sort of opposed to using people in that way. um, but that then I'm also thinking there are also other things behind it, like experiences I had. Also, the fact that I grew up in a Catholic environment, even though I'm not a Catholic myself, I think it contributed to uh, that kind of mentality in some way.
Right. Okay. So, if we take this as an example, let's say you do believe that all kinds of sexual acts are immoral, right?
Yeah.
And is there a term for this belief? Like, is there an ism, or
If there is,
is there a term for this kind of belief that all kinds of sexual acts is immoral? Is there an
I don't
ism
I,
or something?
I don't I don't think there actually is one. I mean, like some um, very conservative people would believe something very similar. I mean, the closest that comes with it, like, there's one type of sexual activity that is moral, and that is uh, that under marriage with goal of creating life.
Mm.
But that isn't exactly where I'm coming from, because I think even of that as an uh, intrinsically immoral act. I don't know. I would call it neg. I think there's a term called like sex positive
Mm.
that is used a lot of the time. I would call it sex negative, I guess.
Okay. Would anti-sexualism be a label?
Anti-sexualism.
Just for for this discussion, if I may use that label, like,
Yeah.
anti-sexualism, you are an anti-sexualist by this definition, let's say. Now, you
Depends what it implies. Is it something I believe in myself, or because it may also sound like I think that I'm being morally judgmental to people who engaged in that, and that wouldn't be the case. I have a lot of friends who engage in sexual activities. Some of them are sex workers. I don't treat them any less than that. I may think of the activity as immoral from my own point of view, but it doesn't change how I view people necessarily.
yeah, I exactly. So,
Yeah,
not about treatment, but about moral consideration. You think that
yeah,
that particular action that those people are doing is still immoral,
yeah,
right? So, if by that, in that sense, if you are an anti-sexualist, you can still argue that you are an anti-sexualist. You know that people are not going to change this. People are going to have sex, but you can continue to think that that is still immoral act, right? Without
yeah, yeah,
anti-sexualism
yeah.
having to have a certain goal or prescribing a goal. So in a similar manner, why can't you do that with antinatalism, right?
No, I think you can. I don't think I've ever stated on any occasion that you can't. I mean, there's a lot of ideologies that never came to fruition, either yet or never will. Anarchism is one example of that, and I'm not telling people shouldn't call themselves that. I think you can believe in things. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Right. So the reason I'm asking this is because what I thought was your reason to stop being an antinatalist was that antinatalist goals were futile. So if you'd remove that.
that's one of the reasons. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Before we go into the other reasons, because I do want to know what other reasons are. Before we go into that, I also want to, talk a little bit about degree in this. So you spoke about anarchism. We can talk about communism, capitalism. I don't think any isms, even if you ascribe a goal, none of the isms have actually achieved their goals. If you ascribe a goal. So, for example, if I
Mm,
say that I am anti-rape, rape is immoral, right? I am definitely not going to be able to stop all the rapes
of
ever
course.
in future, right? But
Yep.
I can still have a position that I am anti-rape.
Yeah.
So there's a degree that even if the goal is there, and even if the goal is not achieved, you could still identify yourself with that philosophy, framework,
Of course.
ethics, ideology, whatever you call.
Of course.
So I want to, if you agree with that, I want to move on to other reasons. What are your
Mhm.
other reasons for not being an anti-natalist?
No, I agree with you 100% there. Yeah, I think also anti-fascism, anti-communism is another example of that, right?
Yeah.
Well, we still have remnants of the two, sometimes going stronger. So yeah,
Yeah, true. So, what are the other reasons apart from the goal that you think?
yeah, it's because I don't necessarily think that having a new human come to be is necessarily uh, bad or immoral. I think if we think of all of it as purely immoral, it's like speaking in absolutist terms. I think
Hmm.
it brings a lot of good to society to have new people, and those social effects of that I was talking about, such as having younger people taking care of older ones, also working, so you can actually retire instead of working until you are uh, 90, even though you're unable to perform at that point. I can imagine, a society that forces people to work until that point, because societies, governments, a lot of the time they prioritize economic stimulation above people. So
Hmm.
I think the call to populate that the governments also gave. Japan is a perfect example right now, where population is going down. The government wants people to populate the country. And is it really in the interest of the people, or is it in the interest of the economy of the state? In and of itself, it seems like we are sort of born into that system where we are being pawns. So I can sort of agree that there is a negative connotation to being born. Um, However, I don't necessarily always think that the negative outweighs the positive, and I think that would be my major disagreement with Benatar.
Right. So, if I understand what you're saying, is that even if bringing that person into existence is bad for that person, or might be bad for that person, the positives that person brings on to others already existing in the society can outweigh that bad, and therefore it
Um,
is permissible to have him. Is that right? Is that
not no, not necessarily. I think as an individualist, partially maybe an egoist. I'm not sure. I don't consider myself an egoist. but definitely an individualist. I think bringing the good to oneself first and foremost comes before the collective. I mean, I think in order to have happy collective, we need to have happy individuals first and foremost. So life must also bring something good to them, and you know, I'm thinking that if somebody's life is definitely going to be horrible, uh,
Mm.
we can't know that, right? There's always a risk associated with being born or giving life to someone else. But I think whether life, how horrible life is something that is highly subjective, and I'm speaking sort of with experience here, but I think a lot of the bad shit in life we can overcome and turn it into something positive. I think there's always a potential to turn the bad into good. However, I guess most antinatalists will agree with me that lack of that life is not bad in and of itself.
Mm.
I would consider it a neutral. I consider death to have a neutral value. I think I might be coming more from an Epicurean perspective. That I view death as neutral, except Epicurean viewed life as mostly good. He was
Yeah.
very hedonistic about life. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily share that perspective.
Right. Okay. But so, okay. So let me rephrase if I understand this right. Okay.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is you are comparing the bads and goods in life of an existing life. But can that comparison be truly applied to the question of whether we should start a new life?
Um, well, there's very little epistemic access we have to the future of a person that is unborn, right? So I would agree with the statement that we can't really completely uh, apply it in that sense because we can't really know it with certainty because of the lack of that epistemic access. But that is also part of the reason why I wouldn't have kids myself. It's just that people who in some ways you could say I'm still an antinatalist on an individual level, but I don't think I'm an antinatalist on like a more collective level. I'm not telling people they shouldn't have kids because I think that comes from a position of having a sense of superior morality. And I don't think I have a superior morality to people around me. And why should I call that something they believe in to be a good? Why should I tell them that that is in fact morally wrong? Uh, but I'm grateful for my own life, despite it there's being a lot of suffering in my life. I don't think suffering is necessarily bad. I think might be something we might have a different view on.
Why do you think suffering is not bad?
Well, I know you mentioned in your response to my video that you think suffering is intrinsically bad, even though good results might come out of it later on, such as growth. Um, I think suffering in and of itself has a neutral value. It becomes negative because we perceive it as such, because we perceive pain uh, as painful, right? But now, I mean, sure, you can talk about examples where nobody is experiencing suffering. So then suffering is something in a vacuum, but is it really suffering? Let's say there's a person who doesn't experience the firing of the C fibers. They don't experience any physical pain, but they still, let's say they get burned. Let's say their limbs get cut off. They're not feeling it. Uh, is that is that suffering, or is it a lack of suffering at that point? I think we are entering sort of a gray area, That's why I don't think we can speak in absolutist terms there. And then you have cases where people enjoy physical pain, and I think there's actually a connection. I think there's a very close connection between pain and pleasure. Really, it's sort of, yeah. It's partial also how our brains interpret that, and sometimes even though suffering may feel bad, you also
Mm.
it's good for you. I think things like uh, studying, if you actually dedicate yourself to sit there with a book whole day and you're studying, sure, yes, it's suffering, but you're also feeling a sense of um achievement, sense of growth, sense of meaning, and I think that triumphs that suffering. And then what, this whole suffering, it actually feels good. um Exercise is another example of that. I don't like to think of suffering as something entirely intrinsically good, and also don't think of pleasure as something that is intr- sorry, suffering as something intrinsically bad, and pleasure as something entirely intrinsically good. There's a lot of substances out there that give us a sense of pleasure, a pleasurable experience, or an escape from the pain and suffering, but it's not necessarily good for you. That which is pleasurable is not always good for you. And therefore, I also think that the opposite is true, that that which can be painful, or that which can bring suffering, is not always entirely bad.
So I want to ask a little bit about. Okay, I think you know about the distinction between instrumental positive value of suffering and
Mm,
intrinsic negative value.
yeah.
But I think the point that you're making is, for some kinds of pleasures, you ought to have pain. Otherwise, you can't have the pleasures. For example, if I want to enjoy drinking water, really, really enjoy drinking water, I should really, really be thirsty. Otherwise, I would not value the act of drinking water. Am I framing this right?
Mm. Uh, so I'm going to drink tea. Excuse me.
Did I make you thirsty?
Yeah, actually, I made a tea before we started
Oh,
this recording, and I forgot about it.
okay.
Mm. Yeah, I know. I think a deprivation of something makes you appreciate it.
Yeah.
I have worked with people with disability, right?
Hmm.
And it's something a lot of people don't talk about because it's one of those uncomfortable truths. But the truth is, people with disabilities are on average more lonely than
Hmm.
people who are not disabled. And uh, I've met a guy who was 40 when he met his first partner. He was disabled, right? And he never thought that he would find a woman in his life. And now I'm thinking someone like that will appreciate that love that another person can offer you, in a on a whole different level than someone who, let's say, has their first experience of this sort when they're a teenager or in their early 20s.
Yeah. Uh, so basically, your point is deprivation gives us a deeper meaning to whatever the values we have, or deprivation in fact helps us enjoy the pleasures that we can enjoy. Is that right?
Well, I think this is highly subjective. I think it depends on the person how they interpret that deprivation. Because then you might have someone who's also in the same situation, who has their first love experience at 40, and they're very bitter about it because they feel like they're less worthy, or they think that women were not paying attention for them, so they develop more a negative view towards women. So I don't think there's like a universal answer to that.
Right. So what I'm still struggling to understand than what you're saying. Is it that pain, why would pain or suffering have a positive value other than either it being instrumental or it providing a deprivation for us to enjoy positive things? What is the other reason that pain or suffering would not have negative value?
Oh, well, if when you talk about instrumental, do you mean
Hmm.
like, yeah, you're talking about the positive potential effects of that suffering? But I also think sometimes suffering is good in and of itself, even if it doesn't bring any effects to that. You know,
Right. It,
yeah, I think there's a lot of the times in my life that I experienced suffering and didn't necessarily learn anything from it. But I think, would I have empathy towards people who are experiencing something worse if I didn't experience that? That is, although I suppose that could be considered instrumental in and of itself. But I think
mm,
when you talk about like the intrinsic value of suffering, right? I think if you're already at that point, understand that, hey, this suffering is good for me.
mm,
It's intrinsic for you that suffering is good. In order for something to be intrinsic, it's really about how you interpret it. Because if you think of it as a abstract term, if in and of itself it has a purely neutral uh, intrinsical value. So I think whether when we consider suffering as something good or bad, it automatically becomes an instrumental value.
um, right. Uh, Can you give any example where, I mean, you're saying everything is instrumental, there is no intrinsic value. But is that what you're saying,
Oh,
by the way?
that's not necessarily um, what I said. It's just that I think the line between the two is very blurry. I think it
Mm.
becomes intrinsic if you think of it as something in and of itself. But the moment human interpretation kicks in, there will always be a transformation from intrinsic to instrumental.
Can you give an example, like a concrete example?
Uh, sure. And I think already gave that example with like studying, right? Well, let's say reading for 8 hours a day makes your mind, your brain tired. You could
Mm.
say, yeah, sure, it's suffering.
Mm.
If we think of it as something intrinsic, it's really neutral because no one is experiencing it when it's something in and of itself. But well, when you're experiencing it in that moment, whether you assign a positive or negative value to it, it's really up to you. It's not intrinsic. You assign an instrumental value to it right away. It's intrinsic only when there is absolutely no one experiencing it.
How is there? Okay, let me understand this because
Okay.
I'm really struggling to understand this. So let's take the gym example. That's sort of easy for me to understand. So
Sure.
you go to gym, you work hard, you suffer, you go through pain, right? And you do that to achieve something positive. You do that to achieve health or whatever, right? So the positive is health or positive is your goal. You prepare yourself to go through a negative experience. There is no pain without gain. It's implied that the pain part is negative and gain part is positive, right? It is accepted that pain in and of itself is negative. I am ready to go through it because I want to gain the gain whatever I want to gain. So it is
Mhm.
still instrumental. I mean, I can't. Let's imagine that if I could achieve the goal of going to gym without actually doing exercise, I was healthy, I could be healthy, and I could be whatever muscular figure I want to be without actually going through exercise. Why would I go through that? Another parallel example to that is the example of anesthesia. um,
Mhm.
Anesthesia was not available, maybe, I don't know, maybe 500 years ago or 200 years ago. The moment it became available, I could not think of any person who would on purpose say, without any external reason, that I want to have a surgery without anesthesia because I think that particular suffering that I'm going to go through is intrinsically positive.
Okay. Um, you bring up a few points here. Regarding the first example, I think you're already sort of making a subjective interpretation of the whole situation, that pain you're experiencing when working out, when exercising, as bad. But let's say someone approaches with a perspective: this pain I'm feeling like right now, it's good for me, right?
Hmm.
You start viewing it as something bad in that particular moment, so it can be morphed into something good at a later point, which is your body, your health. If you approach it from a perspective that it's good to begin with, that pain is good, just as well with the experience of pleasure, when you're high on certain drugs, and you might be thinking, this pleasure I'm experiencing right now, it's bad for me. um, that it, then it automatically becomes that. Um, so I don't think it's possible to say that something always has this negative value, the way you approach it. I think it's up for interpretation. And as for the second example with anesthesia, yeah, I think there will be very few people who would say, no, I don't want anesthesia. But um, there are people who, for example, don't ask for painkillers after injury or surgery. And I talked to someone like that, and he what he said is he wants to experience that pain to feel alive. And for him, that was meaningful in and of itself. He felt like it was a very fake experience to go for something but don't actually feel it. What do I gain from it if I have an experience that I don't actually experience? So
Right.
I found it to be an interesting perspective. It, that it is something that makes you feel alive, that there's a
Uh,
level of genuinity in that.
would you bring up cases of masochism in this context? Like, is that what you meant at some point?
Um, yeah, I brought that before. I think when I was talking about certain people experiencing pleasure from pain. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I think a lot of the time when we talk about masochism, it is viewed in a sexual content.
Yeah.
And it is a lot of the time, right? So yeah, people gain experience, sorry, pleasure from pain. But I think there's also a level of masochism in that example of someone not wanting to have surgery performed under anesthesia, or not wanting to take painkillers, finding meaning in pain. I think, yeah, I think it's masochism too, because I don't think it's just about pleasure. I think also finding meaning in pain, it can be considered masochistic on some level.
The reason I say this is because I can't remember where exactly we can find the references, but David Benatar has said that the cases of masochism actually are um, pleasure disguising as pain. So those cases are not actual cases of pain or suffering. Those are cases of pleasure. That's what he had said. Now I'll have to go back and find where exactly he has said that in and in
Hmm.
what words,
Hmm.
because I might be
I
misinterpreting them.
I think I remember reading that, but I don't necessarily agree with that position, that it is pleasure disguised as pain. I think it is genuine. It is genuine pain that we just interpret as uh, pleasure,
Right. Okay.
right?
So one more point.
Just as something pleasurable can be interpreted as suffering.
And is that then an example of that, like
Um,
pleasure interpreted as suffering?
yeah, yeah, of course, of course. Massage, let's say, right?
Hmm.
Okay, let's say you are someone is offering to give you a massage,
Hmm.
um, and you are experiencing the genuine pleasure of that massage, of the muscles on your back. Uh, at the same time, you're also someone who has some trauma related to touch, and you're also experiencing um, a level of suffering associated with the physical contact with another person. Then you are actually genuinely experiencing pleasure, but your brain also interpret it as suffering in that moment.
Right. So these cases of pleasure as suffering or pain as positive or pleasure, even though if I grant that point, um, would that not be an extremely negligible minority of the cases? Majority of the things that we go through,
Sure.
like hospitals, illness, cancer, this, that, or even minor things like headache and thirst and hunger and so on, these are straightforward pains and suffering which are pretty much negative. And majority of the things are like that. Would that not be the case?
Well, yeah, I agree with you on that. I think I would agree with most cases. Really, I think there's a lot of suffering that we can do without. Um, but okay, if you had the possibility to remove either all suffering in this moment, all just remove things like starvation and war, um, which would you rather go for?
You mean given a number of sufferings, I have to choose a particular suffering? Is that what you mean?
Um, oh, okay. I might rephrase it in a better way. So, option A is removing absolutely all suffering. Option B is removing most suffering in forms of starvation, war, and illness.
Okay, I see. In the
Yeah,
world, collectively, you
yeah,
mean?
yes. But there will, of course, be other types of suffering. People will still experience something like being disappointed in another person. Um, maybe like falling into alcoholism, having their heart broken, uh, might still break their legs, fall from somewhere. Which
Right.
of these two options do you think would be preferable to you?
So option A is to remove all suffering. Option B is to remove some suffering, but other sufferings remain
Yes.
in the world. I would definitely go for option A if there is no other cost to be paid as a
Hmm.
trade-off.
Yeah, I think that might be the biggest difference in our position, because I think that some level of suffering is almost essential in the way we communicate with others and relate to others. I think we would be very cold as human beings without that element of suffering. Uh, you know, there's within the transhumanist circles, there's this proposition of an eternal bliss that we
Mm.
could achieve through purely technological and medical means, where we are experiencing constant pleasure with no suffering. I don't think that would be ideal. I think there's a lot of depth to human experience we would miss in the process. And I also think it would sort of be inachievable in the sense that it goes against the very basic laws of physics. Because I think that uh, it's one of the laws of the universe that everything is a struggle. Um, both matter and energy struggles. All the growth, change, and motion that happens in the universe in matter and energy, it is a struggle. Uh, Consciousness, however, adds another element to it, because we are vessels of matter and energy that also have this element of consciousness, which makes us aware of that struggle. I think that's the only, it's really the only difference between us and something like water that struggles too. Um, so I think it would go against the very nature and physics to have a reality where there is no struggle, I think there would be no growth whatsoever. I think we would stagnate, and I think that lack of growth, lack of improvement, would in the end be a way worse scenario than there being a little suffering, because I think there's a lot of unnecessary suffering, like
Yeah.
war and starvation, people killing each other. But I mean, even in times of peace, in times where we are not suffering from something extreme and unnecessary, we are still finding our struggles. And I think we should have this autonomy to find our own struggles, to find our suffering. And actually, I often like to think that there's a good thing about being familiar with several languages, because in the Norwegian language, Norway is where I live, there's a strong connection between the word passion and the word suffering. So we have the word lidelse for suffering, but we have the word lidenskap for passion. So like passion
Right.
is born from suffering. And when we speak something like the passion of Christ, what it actually means is the suffering of Christ.
Yeah, that's interesting. But I want to come back to the question of antinatalism here. You said that you would go for option B and keep some, maybe trivial, some amount of suffering instead of eradicating all the suffering. And David Benatar has said, I think in Better Never to Have Been, but I'm not sure, that if we can imagine a world where there is only bliss, only pleasure, no suffering at all, like zero suffering, that kind of world we should be indifferent to. In a sense, it is equivalent to there being no sentient world.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
he seems to be agreeing, or even I agree with you, the fact that what we are is defined by suffering. Like suffering
Absolutely.
is the value or disvalue that we have, which I agree. But the core of antinatalism questions,
Hmm.
do we have to be in the first place? Why the all of these things, the essential parts of there being suffering or other things, are some kinds of needs that are generated once we are here. But if we are not here, and that's what antinatalism is, or if that, on an individual level, if that particular person is not existing, they don't need to care about whether suffering is there or not, and they are not deprived of anything, is the core point.
Yeah, you bring up something very interesting here. Uh, Actually, before I comment on that, may I say something you said about uh, mm, us understanding ourselves through suffering, and it being like an essential part of our lives. I think we represent that also through art that we create. It's all based on struggle and suffering. Uh, if someone, most people, if they went on to watch a film or a TV show or read a book where the character isn't experiencing any struggle, any suffering, we would close that book, we would turn off that film, because we just wouldn't be able to relate to it and we would find it boring. There was an example, maybe 2 decades ago or something like that, where a children book was denied from being published because the main character wasn't going through any significant struggle. It was just too happy. So even for kids, we have this notion that they can't see anything where there's like too happy. They're too happy. There's no suffering. um, so
Yeah.
that's something I found very interesting. But what you suggested later on, it's something I found very very fascinating about. I think we are sort of wired, right, to actually we're wired to struggle and suffering. And I think a lot of the time when we say we don't want to suffer, I think it's something we tell ourselves, but we actually do. And that is part of the reason why we're also attracted to art where struggle is represented. So I think in order for there to be no suffering, we would have to rewire um, human nature not only on a genetic level, but we also would have to rewire the whole universe, the laws of physics. Because if we rewire only us, then we would simply die in a world where there is struggle, but we're not wired for it. So that seems like a very ambitious goal in a way to rewrite the DNA of the whole universe, sort of. Then, of course, non-existence seems like a more feasible goal, I would say.
Right. Well, I don't know. I can't speak for whether there is actually sentience in non-sentient beings, like whether molecules and atoms and all that. So I can't speak for that. But coming from the assumption that sentient beings are the ones who can suffer, um, if like even this case of the need to struggle against something for us to feel that we exist is a need which comes about after we start existing. Somebody who doesn't exist doesn't have that need, so they don't need to be brought into existence.
Yeah, I agree with that premise 100%. Yeah, like there is no need, and I'm not even sure if we create that need really by creating life. I mean, uh, you create the need for the good in the person that already exists, but not necessarily uh, need for life.
Right, right. Okay. Well, we can go on, I think, but is there any another reason that you think in your list that you're not antinatalist?
No, no, not really. I think those are my two main reasons. I think the only thing I would like to add is that I think, and I'm not saying every antinatalist, that would be a generalization, but I think that there's a portion of antinatalists who sort of view their antinatalist position as sort of an excuse to not work for a better future for future generations, right? It's sort of like,
Mm.
well, I'm anti-life, so why should I care about the future generations? And that's when the point about it being unfeasible to
Mm.
convince everyone to stop having kids is that we have to relate to the reality we're living in, and that future generations will exist. And I think it's important to strive for a future with as little unnecessary suffering as possible.
Absolutely, yeah. That there is no disagreement there. I mean, I was just reading today one of the reactions of David Benatar to this recent tragedy. You might know how somebody
Yeah, I'm
blown
familiar.
themselves up, right? Yeah.
Um,
So in his interview, he says that now that you exist, enjoy as much as you can and give the joy as much as you can give to others. So that pretty much like there's no disagreement. Definitely, do good as much as you could. Yeah.
yeah.
Um.
I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, I agree with the position. It also baffles me that a lot of people, when you tell them you're an antinatalist, they would say something like, "Why don't you start with yourself? Right?
Yeah.
Just end it." And I think it comes from the uh, very misunderstanding of antinatalist
Yeah.
philosophy and what it stands for.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, we have already started with ourselves. We are not having any children. So that's what antinatalism is. It's not about killing existing people. True. Very good. I think on that agreement, we can, if you have anything else to say, or we can come to it.
Uh, no, not. I don't think so. Or maybe. Yeah. So the whole thing about me not being an antinatalist, I think it's sort of a matter of how we define it.
Mm.
Because I like to separate my own personal belief from what I think is the best for society in terms of the goals that are feasible to achieve. So I would say my own personal individual level, I could be considered an antinatalist, but I wouldn't propose antinatalist solutions necessarily
Right.
for the whole society. And I also think that yeah, if there's any criticism I can offer to antinatalists, and of course, again, this is not about every antinatalist, not making generalization, uh, is to sort of lose the sense of that you have a superior morality, that
Mm.
people who have different views necessarily make wrong choices even though you believe it yourself. And actually, at the time when I was an antinatalist, I I what it was either an antinatalist Facebook group or a subreddit, and I saw this post made by a person uh, where he hoped that he wished harm or death upon a pregnant woman because
Yeah.
he saw her actions as immoral. And I'm thinking, at that point where you consider yourself from this perspective of superior morality and you wish harm upon people, I think, you might be start thinking, who's the bad guy here, so I
Yeah.
think there's definitely this dark side of antinatalism, this trap one can fall into, which becomes not just antinatalism but also anti-human, in a way. So I think there's a danger of falling into that as an antinatalist. I don't know what
Absolutely. I mean,
I would like to
I,
hear your thoughts on that, actually.
I agree with it. I mean, there's no place for violence in antinatalism. That is the bottom line. In terms of blaming pregnant women or not treating them as pregnant women, I don't agree with that. I would rather take a leaf again from David Benetta's actual personal experience in his life. I don't know if you know about this, but there is a philosopher called Elizabeth Harmon, and in 2010
I'm not familiar, but thank
she in 2010 she had become pregnant, and she went to David Benatar and said that I am pregnant. And he said, okay. And she said, oh, you have to be happy for me, I am pregnant. He said, I am happy for you, I'm just not happy for the child who's going to be born. That is pretty much what I think is the appropriate reaction if somebody pushes you on that. But
Yeah,
definitely
I almost agree with Bellator's position there. I would say I'm neither happy nor sad for or unhappy. Let's say for the child that wasn't born, because I can't know what their future holds for them. So I think it will be sort of wrong for me to say, "Oh, I'm happy for the child that he has a life," or I'm not happy for him or her because they get a life. I think, yeah, that is something that only the kid can know. We shouldn't be
yeah.
happy or unhappy for them.
Right, right. Okay, very good. Alexander, by the way, I should have asked you at the start. Was it Alexander or Alex? You go by Alexander, right?
I go by both, actually. Alexander, a lot of the
Right.
times.
Is there anything that you want to, say where people can find you, your channel, your
Yes,
Instagram,
so
anything?
my channel is called Alexander L, and right now I am doing an analysis of the first chapter of Brave New World, and I intend to analyze every chapter of that book on my channel um, throughout the next year or so. If anyone's interested in that, you can find it on my channel. Upload the first video in that series in just a few days, I hope. In the very first one, I'll be talking about non traditional natalist methods such as artificial wombs. And I also hope to bring a bit of the antinatalist perspective on that in that video as well. So,
Oh, very good. Looking forward.
yes.
Of course, give me all the links. I'll put the links of your channel,
Yeah.
Instagram handle, whatever, in the description, and people can have a look. Um, Thanks, Alexander, for taking your time for
Oh,
this.
it was a pleasure. And thank you for challenging and stimulating my own ideas. That was pleasurable.